You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. This episode is about the survival story of Juliane Koepcke. So it's over to you now, Mark.
Juliane Margaret Koepcke, who was born on the 10th of October in 1954 into a German zoologist family, is a German-Peruvian mammalogist who specialises in bats and is the sole survivor of the 1971 LANSA Flight 508 crash. When the plane was struck by lightning, she fell 3,000 metres or 9,842 feet while still strapped to her seat and suffered numerous injuries, including a concussion, a broken collarbone, a torn knee ligament, along with excruciating eye pain. The LANSA aircraft, as it rapidly plummeted towards the ground, disintegrated before Juliane Koepcke's eyes, with her later recalling the screams, the wind and the searing pain from the seatbelts. However, miraculously, she fell head first, totally unaware of her dangerous descent. Despite her injuries, she then searched for any other survivors, however, found only deceased passengers amongst the wreckage, and as rescue helicopters approached the crash site, Juliane's attempts to signal them also failed. But undeterred by her lack of luck, she then remembered her father's survival tips and followed a stream, believing it would eventually lead to her civilization, and after 9 punishing and exhausting days, Juliane eventually reached a motorboat, stumbled upon a hut, and was finally discovered by local villagers. She was then evacuated to the hospital by a helicopter, and the world soon learned that not only was she the sole survivor of the 93 individuals aboard the crashed 1971 LANSA Flight 508 plane, but that she also survived 11 days alone in the Peruvian Amazon rainforest. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this jungle tracking episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I am a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour who is not a very empathetic person, but as I have friends who are, I just imagine how they must feel. But to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every week, usually on a Tuesday, but occasionally on a Wednesday or Thursday, today Friday, or allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, the darker side of some past celebrities, and the occasional missing person that often goes unnoticed. So, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of this episode's subject that I can reply to. A thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. Or, if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. And if you get a few minutes, perhaps you might like to check out my other social media groups and pages, including Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, which are filled daily with all things unexplained and crime. I'll put the links to some of my socials in the description. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the misadventurous tale surrounding the survival story of Juliane Koepcke, and this week's necessary disclaimer. Well, to be honest, whilst researching for this episode, I actually found this story pretty uplifting. However, I do touch on death by misadventure, meaning the plane crash, of course, so it may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion. And as with all my shows, all the opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, the other day I was asked to watch someone's laptop while they went to the bathroom. However, unfortunately, it got stolen, but it was okay because I told them I saw the whole thing. Anyway, back we go to the story. According to Wikipedia, the Amazon rainforest, which is also known as the Amazon jungle or Amazonia, is a moist, broadleaf tropical rainforest in the Amazon basin that covers most of the Amazon basin of South America. The basin encompasses 2.7 million square miles, of which 2.3 million square miles are covered by rainforests, with this region including territory that belongs to 9 nations and 3,344 indigenous territories. The name Amazon itself is said to arise from a war by the Spanish explorer and conquistador or colonizer Francisco de Orellana, who fought with the indigenous people of the Amazon regions, which included the Tapayas people along with other tribes, and Francisco de Orellana deriving the name Amazonas from the Amazons of Greek mythology that were described by the Greek historians Herodotus and Diodorus. Most of the Amazon forest is in Brazil with 60%, followed by Peru with 13%, Colombia with 10%, and other minor amounts in Bolivia, Ecuador, French Guiana, Guyana, Suriname and Venezuela, with the Amazon itself representing over half of the total area of remaining rainforests on Earth, along with it comprising of the largest and most biodiverse tract of tropical rainforest in the world, with an estimated 390 billion individual trees in about 16,000 species. More than 30 million people of 350 different ethnic groups live in the Amazon, which is subdivided into 9 different national political systems and 3,344 formally acknowledged indigenous territories, with the indigenous peoples making up to 9% of the total population and 60 of the groups remaining largely isolated. Large-scale deforestation does occur in the forest, which in turn creates different harmful effects, and the economic losses due to deforestation in Brazil could be approximately 7 times higher in comparison to the cost of all commodities produced through energy-related environmental impacts. And in 2023, the World Bank published a report proposing a non-deforestation-based economic programme in the Amazon region, as deforestation can hurt agriculture so severely that it could lead to agro-suicide. Juliane Koepcke is a German-Peruvian mammalogist who specialises in bats, who was born in Lima in Peru on the 10th of October in 1954 and is the only child of German zoologists Maria and Hans-Wilhelm Koepcke, who were both working at the Lima's Museum of Natural History when she was born. At the age of 14, Juliane Koepcke, along with her parents, left Lima to establish the Panguana Research Station in the Amazon rainforest, where she learned survival skills. However, it wasn't long before the educational authorities disapproved of her involvement with the station, so she was required to return to Lima, in Peru, to the German international school called the Deutsche Schule Lima Alexander von Humboldt, to take her exams, which eventually led to her graduating on the 23rd of December in 1971. On the 24th of December in 1971, just one day after she had graduated from the German International School, Juliane Koepcke flew on LANSA Flight 508. Her mother, Maria Koepcke, had originally wanted Juliane to return to Panguana with her on the 19th or 20th of December, but Juliane wanted to attend her graduation ceremony in Lima on the 23rd, and to be honest, I don't blame her. It is, after all, quite an achievement to be proud of. So Maria agreed that they would stay for her graduation and scheduled a different flight for Christmas Eve. However, with it being the eve of the festive season, all of the flights were fully booked except for the one with LANSA. Koepcke's father, Hans-Wilhelm, urged his wife Maria to avoid flying with LANSA Airlines due to its poor reputation. However, they booked the flight anyway, and according to Juliane Koepcke, as it was Christmas Eve, everyone was eager to get home. But not only that, everyone was a little angry, mainly in part because the plane was 7 hours late. Once in flight, the plane suddenly entered into a very heavy dark cloud, and then, about 10 minutes later, it was obvious to all the passengers that something was very wrong. There was very heavy turbulence, the plane was jumping up and down, parcels and luggage were falling out from the overhead lockers, and there were many gifts, flowers and Christmas cakes all flying around the cabin, which was then followed by the LANSA Flight 508 plane being struck by lightning in mid-flight, when it then started to disintegrate before it plummeted to the ground. Juliane Koepcke later said of her experience, and I quote,
"When we saw lightning around the plane, I was scared. My mother and I held hands, but we were unable to speak. Other passengers began to cry and weep and scream. My mother was anxious, but I was okay. I liked flying. After about 10 minutes, I saw a very bright light on the outer engine on the left. My mother said very calmly, 'That is the end. It's all over.' Those were the last words I ever heard from her."
After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at what happened to Juliane Koepcke after the plane crashed and her survival ordeal.
Ghost Planet Network, broadcasting from the other side. Ready to tune in to terror? The Ghost Planet Network is your new home for original paranormal content, streaming straight from beyond the veil. We've got it all: spine-tingling stories, chilling documentaries, and real paranormal investigations from the world's most haunted hotspots. Perfect for believers, skeptics, and anyone who loves a good scare. Join the paranormal TV revolution. Get unlimited access for just £12 per year. Tune in now. Email us at neil.hapra@gmail.com to sign up. That's neil.haprc@gmail.com.
When the LANSA Flight 508 plane hit the thunderstorm and lightning was taking place all around the aircraft, the passengers, quite understandably, all started to freak out with sounds of screaming and crying. The plane got really tossed around, sandwich trays were flying everywhere, and Juliane's mum, who was a bit of a nervous flyer at the best of times, tried to calm herself down by saying to herself, and I quote,
"Hopefully everything will be okay."
The plane then suddenly jumped down and went into a nosedive, and all around the pitch-black sky were the sounds of people screaming and the deep roar of the plane engines, and as the plane began to disintegrate in mid-air, Juliane Koepcke and the seat that she was still strapped into became detached from the crumbling plane itself. Juliane Koepcke then found herself falling while still strapped to her row of seats at a height of 3,000 metres or 9,842 feet into the Amazon rainforest. She was later quoted from her memoir called When I Fell from the Sky as saying,
"My mother is no longer at my side and I'm no longer in the airplane. I'm still strapped to my seat, but I'm alone. At an altitude of about 10,000 feet, I'm alone, and I'm falling, slicing through the sky."
The next day, Juliane awoke and looked up into the canopy with the first thought that came into her head being, and I quote,
"I survived an air crash."
She then shouted loudly, calling her mother's name, but it was only met with the sounds of the jungle, along with the realisation that she was completely alone. Somehow, Juliane Koepcke, and rather miraculously I feel, survived the 3,000-metre fall, but suffered many injuries, which included a broken collarbone, a deep cut on her right arm, an eye injury, a ruptured ligament in her knee, and a concussion. She was also wearing at the time a very short sleeveless mini dress and white sandals, and although she had in fact lost one sandal, she kept the other one simply because she was very short-sighted and had lost her glasses, so she would use this sandal to test the ground ahead of her as she walked through the jungle. It's probably worth me pointing out here that before the crash, Juliane Koepcke had spent a year and a half with her parents on their research station, which was only 30 miles away from the crash site, so she had already learnt a lot about life in the rainforest, and not only that it wasn't dangerous, but also that it was not the green hell that the rest of the world always thinks it is. While she was in the Amazon jungle trying to survive her ordeal, she could hear the planes overhead searching for the wreck, but as it was a very dense forest, she couldn't actually see them. She also had to deal with snakes that were camouflaged to look like dry leaves, severe insect bites, and an infestation of botfly larvae in her injured arm. On an interesting side note here, botflies, which are also known as warble flies, heel flies and gadflies, are flies of the Ostridae family. Their larvae are internal parasites of mammals, with some species growing in the host's flesh, and others within the gut, but the Dermatobia hominis is the only species of botfly that is known to parasitize humans routinely, although there are other species of flies that cause myiasis or fly strike, which is the parasitic infestation of the body in a live animal by fly larvae or maggots that grow inside the host while feeding on their human tissue. The word bot in this sense simply means maggots. At the crash site, whilst trying to succumb to her injuries, Juliane Koepcke found a bag of sweets. However, when she had finished eating them, she soon realised that she had nothing more to eat. She then found a small creek and, knowing it would be safer, decided she would walk in the water instead of risking the aftermath of treading on some sort of angry arachnid or snake, later saying of her ordeal, and I quote,
"It was very hot and very wet, and it rained several times a day, but it was cold in the night, and to be all alone in that mini dress was very difficult."
During the fourth day of Juliane Koepcke's Amazon jungle tour, she was somewhat disturbed when she suddenly heard the noise of a landing king vulture, which was a sound she recognised from her time at her parents' Panguana Research Station Reserve, saying that this noise scared her because she knew that this type of bird only lands when there is a lot of carrion or carcasses lying around, which she knew there would be as a result of the plane crash. Then, when she turned a corner in the creek, she found an aircraft bench from the LANSA Flight 508 crash that had 3 passengers rammed headfirst into the earth, saying of the sight before her, and I quote,
"I was paralysed by panic. It was the first time I had seen a dead body."
Thinking that one of the bodies may have been that of her mother, she reached out and touched the corpse with a stick. However, when she noticed that the woman had painted her toenails, she realised that it wasn't her, as her mother never polished her nails, saying again of the incident, and I quote,
"I was immediately relieved, but then felt ashamed of that thought."
By the 10th day of Juliane Koepcke's Amazon Jungle Marathon, what with all her obvious injuries, starvation and thirst, she could hardly stand up properly, and so she just drifted along the edge of the larger river that she had found, later reporting that not only did she feel very lonely, but also that it felt like she was living in a parallel universe far away from any other human beings. Then, suddenly out in front of her, she saw along the edge of the larger river an enormous boat, and thinking that it was some sort of hallucination, she then reached out and touched the craft, only to find that it was indeed the real thing, saying of the incident, and I quote,
"When I went to touch it and realised it was real, it was like an adrenaline shot."
Then, with her luck starting to change, she noticed that there was a small path that led into... I'll do that one again. There was a small path that led into the jungle, where she would eventually find a hut with a palm leaf roof, an outboard motor, and a litre of gasoline. And, not forgetting that she had a wound on her upper right arm which was infested with maggots, each of which, for you entomologists out there, was about 1 centimetre in length, she sucked the gasoline out of its container and put it into the wound, later saying that, and I quote,
"I remembered our dog had the same infection, and my father had put kerosene on it."
The pain of the gasoline on the injury was intense, to say the least, as the maggots tried to burrow further into her wound, but eventually she managed to pull out about 30 maggots in total, and feeling very proud of herself, and I personally don't blame her, she then decided to spend the night at the hut with the palm leaf roof for protection. The next day, at the hut with the palm leaf roof, she suddenly heard voices of several men outside, which Juliane later reported as like hearing the voices of angels, also saying that, and I quote,
"When they saw me, they were alarmed and stopped talking. They thought I was a kind of water goddess, a figure from local legend who is a hybrid of a water dolphin and a blonde, white-skinned woman. But I introduced myself in Spanish and explained what had happened."
And so the men, who she later found out were lumberjacks, treated her wounds by pouring in more gasoline, gave her something to eat, and then the next day they used a canoe to transport her for 11 hours, mind, to a more inhabited area, to which she was then airlifted to the nearest hospital. In total, Juliane Koepcke had spent 11 days in the Amazon rainforest, most of which she had spent walking in a creek that followed a river. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at Juliane Koepcke's recovery, how she was portrayed in the media, and what happened to her mother.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk, or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
The day after Juliane Koepcke's rescue, she saw her father, who could barely talk, and in the first few moments of their reunion, all the pair really did was just hold each other. After recovering from her injuries, Juliane then assisted with the search parties in locating the crash site and recovering the bodies of the other victims, which, of course, meant that for the next few days her father was frantic for any news regarding her mother. However, her body was eventually discovered on the 12th of January in 1972. Juliane and her father later found out that her mother had also initially survived the plane crash, but she was so badly injured she couldn't move, later reporting that, and I quote,
"She died several days later. I dread to think what her last days were like."
It was also discovered during the autopsies that as many as 14 passengers had survived the initial crash. However, they all died while waiting to be rescued. Juliane Koepcke's unlikely survival has been the subject of much speculation over the years, with some experts saying that she survived the fall because she was harnessed into her seat, meaning the window seat, which was attached to the two seats to her left as part of a row of three, which it also being thought to have functioned as a sort of parachute or helicopter even, which helped slow down her fall. That and the impact, which may have also been lessened by the updraft from the thunderstorm that Juliane fell through, as well as the thick foliage at her landing site. I just want to take a short break from the Juliane Koepcke case and have a look at the syndrome known as survivor's guilt. Although I really should point out here that I don't know as to whether Juliane suffered with this or not, or is it me trying to suggest that she should have. I just thought it would be a good opportunity to bring it up. Survivor's guilt, which is also known as survivor's syndrome and survivor's disorder, happens when an individual feels guilty after they survive a tragic near-death or traumatic event when others have perished, which can cause similar depressive symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is, of course, otherwise known as PTSD. The term survivor's guilt was first introduced when the German-American psychoanalyst Dr. William G. Nederland used it to describe the feeling of punishment that many of the Holocaust survivors felt for surviving over their loved ones. The experience and manifestation of survivor guilt will depend on an individual's psychological profile, but when the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders was published in the May of 1994, survivor's guilt was removed as a recognised specific diagnosis and redefined as a significant symptom of a post-traumatic stress disorder. The history of survivor's guilt outlines similar symptoms among the many groups and individuals that experience tragic situations, with other patterns of guilt being found in medical aid groups who, when they lose their patients, they then place the blame on themselves. Other examples of traumatic events that can bring on survivor's guilt include situations when an individual experiences intense feelings of culpability after a loved one has passed, and during a war where it includes the loss of a loved one due to a tragic incident, both of which are closely related to feelings of depression and anxiety that can later lead to PTSD. When Juliane Koepcke was in a better position mentally from her ordeal in the Amazon rainforest, she then returned to her parents' home in native West Germany, where she fully recovered from her physical injuries. Then, like her parents before her, she went on and studied biology at the University of Kiel, eventually graduating in 1980, received a doctorate from the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, and then she returned to Peru to conduct research in mammalogy, specialising in bats, publishing her thesis in 1987 titled The Ecological Study of a Bat Colony in the Tropical Rainforest of Peru. In 1989, Juliane Koepcke married Erich Diller, who was a German entomologist who specialises in parasitic wasps. Now there's a pull, eh, girls? But anyway, I digress. Come forward a few years, and in 2000, following the death of her father, she then took over as the director of the Panguana Research Station, which is still located at the same place in the Amazon rainforest, and she currently serves as a librarian at the Bavarian State Collection of Zoology in Munich. Juliane Koepcke's autobiography, called When I Fell from the Sky, How the Jungle Gave Me My Life Back, was released in 2011, winning that year's Korean Literature Prize, and in 2019 the government of Peru made her a Grand Officer of the Order of Merit for Distinguished Services. Juliane Koepcke's survival has been the subject of numerous books, films and podcasts over the years, including a low-budget and heavily fictionalised film by the Italian filmmaker Giuseppe Maria Scotese from 1974, which was released in English as Miracles Still Happen, although sometimes it goes by the name of The Story of Juliane Koepcke, where she was portrayed by the English actress Susan Penhaligon, where some of you sharper-minded listeners of a certain age may remember her as the actress who played Judi Dench's younger sister, Helen, in the 1980s sitcom A Fine Romance, amongst other numerous TV shows and dramas. However, Juliane's story was more faithfully told by Koepcke herself in the German filmmaker Werner Herzog's 1998 documentary called Wings of Hope. Werner Hosig was interested in telling Juliane's story because of a strong personal connection. You see, by all accounts, he was also scheduled to be on the same LANSA 508 flight while scouting for locations for his film Aguirre, The Wrath of God in 1972, but a last-minute change of plans spared him from the crash, and ever since he narrowly missed the flight. He had planned to make the movie, but he was unable to contact Juliane Koepcke for decades, mainly because she avoided the media. Eventually, his persistence paid off and he managed to locate her after contacting the priest who originally performed her mother's funeral back in 1972, and so she accompanied him on a visit to the crash site, which he described as a, and I quote,
kind of therapy. Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 175, we are going to be looking at The Haunting of Wizard Clip. The legend of the Wizard Clip is a popular ghost story about an incident said to have occurred in Middleway, West Virginia in the 1820s. The story of the Wizard Clip is part of the oral history of the area and was called by Reverend Alfred E. Smith, Editor-in-Chief of the Catholic Review and Secretary to Cardinal Gibbons, the truest ghost story ever told.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations, as usual, wasn't mine. The voice actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar. With special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you do know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast, if they're happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. Can't get that right. And remember, guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. No AI was used or harmed in the making of this or any other episode of Mark's Unexplained World. This show and all its contents were covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.